Business of Property podcast. I'm Simon. I've been investing in property for over 20 years, and if you're an active landlord or planning your next property investment, this podcast is for you. If you're willing and able to leave a rating or review in your podcast player of choice, I would very much appreciate it. It really does help to spread the word. Today, I'm joined by Rob Turner, who is a land director at Virtue Property Group. And he is going to talk to us about all things land and site finding and planning and planning applications, sort of processes and things as well. But first of all, Rob, thank you very much for joining me. And can you just tell everyone a bit about what being a land director means?
Afternoon, Simon. Yes, of course. My role is to find opportunities for the company, land opportunities, whether that be with or without planning, and help grow the business. So we look for sites without planning that we can put into the system and work through those sites during the course of the year. And then if we have sort of gaps in our build program, then we will look to purchase sites that are consented and ready to go. So it's a question of me using my contacts, agent contacts, landowners that I know, to find those opportunities, and also writing to people direct. So I do what's called a mini land study, where I'll focus on an area that I want to target, where I know that there's a bit of a housing shortage, and I will identify opportunities and I will write to people. And that's kind of the process in terms of how we find opportunities. And then obviously with those opportunities, if they don't have planning, then I will go and visit those sites, walk over the site, look into all the relevant planning policies, and I will come up with a scheme that I think is suitable and make an offer on that basis.
So when you're looking for sites, you said they might come through agents. So sort of a couple of broad approaches you mentioned there, agents and sort of going out and finding yourself. So perhaps if we just look at agents first, and I'll come back to the other one in a moment. Are these sort of standard high street estate agents that will also have land opportunities, or are they more specialist agents?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a mixture. So your bread and butter estate agents, because obviously they're going out to see properties, and I think providing they understand what might be a potential to pick up the phone to me or even suggest to the owners that, yes, you want to sell, but there might be potential here to enhance that value, then they will contact us. So, yeah, local estate agents, commercial agents, because obviously we buy a commercial property as well, and that has development potential, and then obviously very specialist land agents. So, yeah, there's probably two or three sources that they come through, but it's more about perhaps the local estate agents being fed by me or others about what is an opportunity and what isn't, and they start to get to grips with that and know there could be something here, and hence they make contact.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So if your opportunities don't come through an agent, but you're having to go out and look for them yourself, how do you approach that? Do you just sort of pull up a satellite map and look for gaps?
Not a million miles off, to be honest. There's various ways. You could be out in your car, having a drive round, taking a walk locally in the town. If you do that, I think you find you can spot things a bit better, whether that be a small-scale development where you might be able to put a house on the side of someone's garden, or perhaps something in the back, or a house that's run down, or a commercial property that looks a bit run down and potentially there's further development there. So walking around, driving around, yes, on the maps. You could go onto the council's websites through their proposals map, which basically gives you the ordnance survey, shows you all the plot sizes and all the policies. So I use that method. There's other search engines that are good for plot finding, which I've used more recently to help quicken the search. But yeah, ultimately it's just a case of doing a bit of graft in the office or in the car to identify them. And I normally do, like I said, a land study of an area. and I'll either in the car or in the office marking out what I think looks potential, and looking into a bit further, or simply getting some letters out. Or door knocking as well, to be honest. I do a fair bit of door knocking as well if I'm out and about, and gets you a straight answer quickly.
So if you do manage to find a site that you're curious about from either of these sort of approaches, what's your next step in trying to decide whether it really has potential for you?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one to. You can't go into too much detail because I could spend a fair bit of time looking into it. If those people aren't interested, then I've completely wasted my time. So I think I'll have an eye for what I think might be potential and a potential idea. I might sometimes do a little bit of research, but ultimately it's about getting the letters out, seeing if there's interest, and then I will go to town in terms of looking into that opportunity before I go and talk to the owners in great detail.
So if you've had a little bit of interest from the owner and you're then sort of digging in a little bit more, what are some of the sort of early red flags that might suggest a site is definitely not what you want?
One of the key things could be the existing use value. So if you go out to a site and the property, it's a residential property and that property is quite large, even if the plot's fairly big, what you can find is that sometimes you can't make those work because that value is too high for what you can get back on. So that's normally a kind of key factor. Or if you go down to the site, there's quite a few trees, and when you do your research, you see that those trees are protected. Well, that's going to limit your development of the site and means you can't get enough on there to make it work. So, yeah, things like that. Or, if you find that the site's in flood zone 3, which is the kind of the worst case scenario, then yeah, that could be problematic. So yeah, you can get to grips with it more once you do the detail. So those are the sort of immediate things. Or if you had a commercial property and you get into the detailed policy and that commercial unit is protected and safeguarded, then yeah, that's going to be a problem in terms of changing it for residential. So those are the immediate ones for me.
So it sounds like a lot of those really hinge on the costs involved in being able to either acquire the site from the land value, or in terms of what you can put on that site, and hence the value that it might end up having in the end.
Yeah.
Do you put together sort of rough figures to work this out, or do you put in a lot of detail, and how much effort does that take at this sort of relatively early stage?
Do you mean in terms of evaluating the site?
Yeah. I mean, do you sort of scribble some numbers on the back of a napkin and a quick sort of plan of where a house or two might go, or do you phone up architects and get them to spend the next 2 weeks putting together a site plan for you, and then get in some quantity surveyors to cost it all up and whatever else?
No, simple answer is that no. I do it all myself. So we have an appraisal system, spreadsheet that we use, that you have inputs that you put into there that then chucks up a kind of a value with all those inputs in. So I have that to use, which is fairly straightforward. But in order to get to that point, yes, I'll need to go and research values in the area. And yes, I will need to put in what I think what I'm proposing is worth. Talked about before the sketch schemes to see what you could do with the site. I do that myself. So once I've visited the site, check the constraints, trees, things like that, floodplain, whatever. If I've met the owner, then I'll go back to the office with that information, and then I will start to draw up where I think development could go, and I will work out what those will be, and then I will feed that into our appraisal system to see what kind of value that generates. So yeah, I won't go out externally at that stage. There's quite a bit I know myself, so most of it I can cover. If I need expert advice, then I'll pick up the phone. but generally speaking, I'll be able to deal with the majority of it myself until offer stage. And then obviously you go into a lot more detail once you've got an offer accepted.
Yeah. So at this early stage, you've got an idea of the potential value, and hence you can work out what you can put in as an offer. But at this point, presumably there's no planning permission,
Yeah.
generally speaking, because I know sometimes you look at sites that already have planning permission, but mostly they don't. And hence you don't really know whether what you're thinking about, what you're proposing, is actually going to be possible or not. So presumably you're not going out and buying these sites yet, are you?
No. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know whether it's possible 100%, but I know enough to know from the years I've been doing it whether I think it's got a chance. And I could be looking at the planning history is the first thing I'll look at as well. What's the planning history? Have any other applications been considered? Building a picture, what's been done around it? And then I can inform what I think is suitable on that basis. So that's the way I look at it. And yeah, you won't know for sure whether you're going to get that, but ultimately that's my call. And I'll be looking around the area to see what else has been done. Could I do something similar? Where all the arguments are.
And you feel that even though you won't know for sure, you can you can get pretty close from looking at the history of the site and the history around that site for what you think might, or at least should, be accepted by the planning system.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. Build the picture, look for arguments. That determines whether I think I'm going to get an easier ride or not. But yeah, that's ultimately my job, is to make that assessment, what I think is possible. And just going back to your other point in terms of going in buying it. So if the site doesn't have planning, we're not going in to buy it. We're getting a contract to buy it, subject to planning. So we would get like an option agreement, which is an option to purchase for a price based on a scheme that I think is suitable. So once we go through the planning system, once I get planning, then that's when we look to exercise the option and then complete the purchase. So that's how it works. Unless we're buying something that's already got planning, then obviously that would be a straight cash purchase.
Cool. So once you've got that sort of purchase option in place, I suspect that really is just where the hard work starts.
Correct.
And perhaps you can walk us through the next bit, which is quite significant, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't know, perhaps you want to pick an example site and walk through sort of what actually happened on that, because I know you've got a few interesting sites in your history. So yeah, once you've got that option agreed, what's next?
Yeah. So once you've got the legals and option signed up, the next process is to go and get a survey of the land, a topographical survey, because ultimately you need that to then work out your designs and your drawings to submit to the council. So once the survey's in, you're then checking everything, making sure that survey fits in with the title, the land, an overlay to make sure there's no discrepancies. And then the next stage is obviously to start working up your drawings with an architect. Usually, I would go for a pre-application meeting with the council. So that's a kind of beginning stage before you put your main application in. You do kind of minimal drawings. You put your case, why you think the site should be developed. That goes into the council. You get a meeting with the council, which is all videos now, ever since COVID. Which is not so good because in person's much better, but you'll have a meeting with them. They'll give you the feedback. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. But ultimately it's a bit of a box ticking exercise, and it helps you kind of gain some feedback prior to going in with your main application so that you get it as correct as possible. Once you've gone in with that pre-app meeting, got the feedback, the application goes in. Depending on what size application, it's normally 8 weeks, although it's not happening in 8 weeks at all. It's taking much, much longer. There's delays. in all councils, and you'll wait for some feedback on your application once it's been validated. It's gone out for consultation with all the various people to get feedback to the planning officer and feedback to you, and then you'll understand what their kind of views are on that proposal, and then you'll either be working with them to iron out a few details, or you'll be waiting for their kind of decision within that period. But as I said, it goes in, quite a bit longer. Just in terms of sites, so the last one I did, which was over in Surrey, which was actually a greenbelt site, which was 4 detached houses, very rural, used to be a former kennels. The principles I talked about, redeveloping the site, using the built form and areas to provide less of an area, because the houses will be less hard standing and less built form. That's the argument. Greater for the greenbelt. I held a pre-app with the planning officer, who I actually knew from other applications. It was actually probably one of my best meetings I've had. Very positive. Got the feedback. Needed to make some changes on the design, which I did, and some tweaks to the layout. Went back in for planning, and I got that at a local level. So that was a very satisfying result, and fairly quickly. I think I got that within 6 months.
Fairly quickly, only half a year. Yeah.
Well, it's a long time, but quite often they're taking, a year, 2 years, if not longer in some cases. So, for something like that, that was pretty good considering. I think I'd bite your hand off if every one of the sites was only taking sort of 6 months to get your consent.
So with a site taking that long, presumably you've got quite a few of these sort of in progress at once that you're juggling between. How many projects would you have in your whole pipeline sort of any one time?
It just depends. For me personally, it's anything from sort of 4 to 7 projects on the go, either in planning or in legals. That's your aim. It depends how many people you've got in your team. At the moment, it's just myself, but we're looking to change that. So, depending on the experience of the person involved, you definitely expect to be having a number of projects on at any one time. So, yeah, it is a juggling act, and they're all at different stages. But for me personally, I get quite involved in the planning side, and have done for a number of years. And whilst that can be tricky and difficult, it does teach you an awful lot. And I've had lots of different situations that you do get experience from, whether positive or negative.
So that's a good segue to some other things I was wanting to ask you about. So can you describe the sort of housing development scheme that you were most convinced was a great idea, but actually got turned down by planning?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think there's anything that I specifically thought is a good idea and it's just completely gone against. But I think it's very difficult to know the size of the development you think you can get. And there's a juggling act here between, satisfying a landowner in terms of their aspirations, and also satisfying, planning committees, councils, officers. So I can definitely say, hand on heart, I've looked at things possibly too bullish, and I've been unsuccessful on several occasions with the amount of development being proposed, which is a very costly exercise, and quite often with the delays with the council, you don't always have the time to be able to resolve that with your contract with the owners and the council to be able to come up with an alternative scheme. And obviously any changes could mean financial changes to what your offer was originally. So I think for me, you can just give an honest assessment of what you think, and providing you work with landowners that understand what you're trying to do and give feedback. If things don't go the way you plan, then they understand what you've gone through, and hopefully sensible about the outcome. But it can happen. It can happen. Some are easier to call
So,
than others.
so on the other side, then, have you got any projects you can think of that you put in and you were thinking, this probably isn't going to fly, and it just worked, and it was all good.
Yeah, look, I think there's quite a few that happen like that. Some you think are going to be more straightforward, and then they turned out to be more complicated, and vice versa. I think when I did one of my first greenbelt sites, which is actually I live on the development that I did many years ago. It was my first one of these, and I had a good idea because I'd never done it before. I was unsure how it would be perceived, and I had a kind of fallback position, and the response from the council was more positive than I was expecting. And actually, we got more out of it, more development out of the site than I'd originally expected. So, and having got that result, I ended up buying, one of the houses for myself because I like the location so much. So yeah, it's always a good memory that for me, living in the development and how that all panned. Given my initial view was cautious.
So perhaps you can sort of try and paint a picture for listeners of one of these developments. So maybe the one you live on, or maybe the other
Yeah,
one you mentioned that's in the Greenbelt, and sort of what does the site look like or what did this specific site, whichever one you pick, look like when you first saw it, and then what did you propose to do with it from that?
sure. Yeah, so speaking about the place where I live, so this was a site in the Greenbelt. The majority of the site was in the Greenbelt. The front part of the site was in the village settlement, so there is a difference, a bit more scope in the village settlement to the Greenbelt. It was a detached bungalow that was a bit run down, needed a bit of work. It had a long access drive down the side of it, and in the back was about an acre of land or so that had a little cattery on it, cattery building, and some warehousing buildings, and some old former kind of pig stables. So it's a bit of a mixture of outbuildings.
Yeah.
Little bit untidy, and I managed to strike a deal with the owner on a subject to planning basis, which is taking an option for a price to buy the house and the land at the back. And as I said, my initial thought process on the site was to keep the bungalow and perhaps do sort of 3 dwellings in the back, slightly larger. That was my initial thought process. And once we got it secured and went in with planning, did a pre-application meeting with the council, and we were testing it a little bit with the council. So we showed a bit more development than we were proposing, just to sort of gauge their view. And they weren't happy with it at all, because we were spreading out the development in the Greenbelt, which is I obviously know now is not the way to go, and very negative about it. However, the officer was quite a senior officer, and they made some very useful suggestions about concentrating the development more within the main built-up area, and suggested a possible courtyard scheme, which to me was really helpful. So from that meeting, we went away. I did some research. My parents lived in a kind of Barney-style house nearby, so I already had in my mind what kind of development we could do. Fed that back to our architects gave him some information on styles, nice black cladding on the front, nice red bricks, and we came up with a scheme that was for 7 houses. And in a kind of courtyard format. We had a little area of space at the back for, like a communal green space that would be kept for residents, and that went back in to the council with it, and it was received very well. There was a few delays, but nothing wrong with the scheme. Few queries on policy, but we got that through at local level. And it's been built out, and it's a very attractive scheme. That's an improvement of what was there before, and the existing bungalow was had some improvements and done up.
So I'm sort of imagining how this would look, and my sort of I know the picture in my mind is that you've got a site with the bungalow sort of at the front, which presumably has some road frontage.
Yeah,
And you said there's a drive down the side, and then the acre or so is available at the back.
yeah,
So my imagining is that this is a relatively sort of long or deep site, I should say,
yeah,
but not quite so wide. And you mentioned that the front part was sort of in a village area, whereas the back was greenbelt.
yeah.
So you mentioned you went for a courtyard sort of setup. So is that a courtyard sort of positioned behind the original bungalow in the greenbelt section, or how? Yeah, can you sort of try and fill in the gaps in my paintwork?
No, absolutely, I understand. So on the frontage, you've got the bungalow. To the side, there's an access. It's quite a long access. The existing bungalow's got quite a long garden. The access goes down the side, and as you go into the back part of the site, which is quite a big area of over an acre, you've got all the existing commercial buildings, the cattery, the stables, and several commercial buildings that were used for warehouse, like storage.
But were they all bunched together in a sort of
Yeah, that's the
area,
thing.
or were they spread out over this acre?
What you find in most of these commercial sites in the greenbelt is the buildings are always stuck in a quite awkward position, hard up against the boundary. So when you're looking to develop greenbelt sites and you want to replace where those buildings are, they're not the best places to put a house and then have a garden with it. So some of them, the majority were on the side boundary. The others were slightly spread out. So when I replanned it, I pulled away from that existing built form slightly so that the houses can then have gardens. And you had a row of houses, kind of like in a U shape, with some garaging. If you imagine a classic rural site where you've got commercial rural buildings, they're in a cluster, aren't they, in a kind of U-shaped courtyard. So we used that idea to form our new courtyard, and had houses on either side, but in a U shape, and pulling it away from the boundaries so that there could be gardens big enough, to make the development work. So, and that was enough to say that yes, there's going to be some movement from the built form, but it was only fairly mild. And the improvements were significant to the rest of the site. All the hard standing gone, much more openness in the greenbelt. So that was our process.
So did you actually, through those changes, increase the amount of greenery that there was, because you took away a lot of the hard standing and other buildings and things?
Yeah, that's the difference between a commercial site that's going to have a load of hard standing. The buildings are going to be spread. The footprints are going to be quite big. Whereas if you come along and do a housing scheme, you can reduce that hard standing. You can increase the greenery, and you can break up the built form with each house having a kind of gap in between, and create more greenery. And it's going to look a lot better, providing that scheme is still in a rural kind of design, and nicely done. So it's an improvement to the greenbelt, and that's the argument.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sounds very nice. It's and obviously it is because you chose to live there as well. So it's,
Yeah.
certainly an endorsement. So just as we're sort of coming to a close, I'm curious as to maybe you can pick out I don't know, 2 or 3 sort of common issues that you come up against when trying to either sort of work out a plan or get a plan through the planning application process. What are a couple of common issues and sort of ways you might or ways you have worked around those or solved those issues for different sites?
Yeah, I think a common problem with most sites is a lot of councils come up with kind of the classic character issue, and those are quite difficult to argue because everyone's got a different view to that. So I think during your planning application, I think you really need to do your homework on how you're going to address those points before you actually get into the application, and really think carefully about your arguments. The key thing with all the application is making sure your arguments are sound before you go in. And I think it's very difficult when you're in the application process to overcome them, because the council are less engaging at the moment. Used to be back in the day that you could have a dialogue, and if there was concerns, then they would come back to you. But I think that's a bit of a loose term. On the commercial sites, most of the fundamental issues you come across is the loss of employment. So some of these commercial sites, the councils may have a specific policy about, overcoming the loss of employment. So some means you might have to do a marketing campaign to prove that the building is no longer required, or there's other reasons like the access might be unsuitable for commercial use. So I think it's very useful to do your homework prior rather than during that application, because you'll get very little chance to overcome some of those issues. Most of the stuff during the application would be kind of minor issues. If it's anything major, they're not going to let you resolve it during the application. So most of it's little tweaks or further information required on that scheme. But I would say it's important to get your homework done early rather than leave it to chance during the application. There's a number of different things that can come up during that application process. Lot of them now, with the latest rules coming in, is biodiversity net gain and some issues with water neutrality in some of Sussex. So those are ongoing issues that could cause you significant delays. So be aware.
This is a whole new can of worms that we haven't got time to go into in detail.
No,
But as soon as you
absolutely,
mentioned it,
absolutely.
can you just tell people what biodiversity net gain is in a sentence or two?
Yeah, no, it's just
Come
all
on.
to do with the environment and habitat, and if you're losing wildlife, making sure that you're putting back in to developments rather than just taking away. So there's kind of most developments now need to provide an area within their site where there is some positive gain in biodiversity and wildlife. So I won't bedazzle anyone any more than that, but it's something that has to be considered on all sites now, even smaller sites, which is quite difficult.
Yeah, I think this is quite a new addition, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, so we are pretty much out of time. So thank you very, very much for joining me today and running through all of that expertise in the sort of land evaluation and planning processes. There will be links to Virtue Property Group in the show notes. But if people want to get in touch with you, is there any more direct method?
I think if they come through the Virtue website, info Virtue Property Group .co.uk, then I will be able to pick up those requests as and when needed. I'd say that's the best route.
Cool, fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Hopefully that was useful.
Very definitely, very definitely. Thank you very much for everyone listening, and I will talk to you again next week.